Thank you very much for joining. So many students, it's wonderful, it's great. So many young people being interested in the international economic system in general, but maybe also from a most distinguished perspective, US, but general global perspective, namely by James Bacchus, who is with us. We are very much honored, very much happy to have you here. It is 20 years, that is to say, most of you were either just born or maybe not even yet in kindergarten or something like that, that Jim Bacchus was with us, also in one of my lectures in international economic law here in Halle. And it's great after 20 years to have you back, Jim. Thanks a lot for joining. Just a very short introduction so that you know who you're talking to, who is talking to you, and you will talk to him later on. James Bacchus did his undergrad at Vanderbilt universities, originally not from Florida, but more or less lived all of his life in Florida, if I see it correctly. He studied, as I said, in Vanderbilt, and then later on in Yale. His legal education was at Florida State University College of Law. He has, if I may say, shifted back and forth from serving, first of all, in the military for quite some years, then being a lawyer, then being a politician, being a lawyer, again, being an international judge at the appellate body. He, to make it more concrete, after, as I said, his service in the army was at different functions in public and political service. Finally, he got elected in 1991 to the House of Representatives, twice re-elected, where he served until 1995, is that correct? I guess, yes, until 1995 in the House. And then he became one of the founding members of the appellate body of the World Trade Organization, as the students know, which was founded in 1995 with the appellate body, and served there 2 terms. Also for 2 terms as a chairman of the appellate body. That was a challenging time. It was already the topic of your last visit. It will be again a topic today. A challenging time also for us as scholars who of course closely followed, namely that time where the appellate body developed his reputation, got judgments that were criticized, others that were very much welcome, very interesting for international lawyers in general. After Jim Bacchus retired from the appellate body, he went back to practice, legal practice, in an international US international law firm, and he, if I may say, retired from that a couple of years ago and then became a professor for global affairs in Florida, and since then is giving presentations and writing a lot. If I see it correctly, 3 books, you said by now, and we have the privilege of getting some insights of this scholarly work and the practice time, of course, Jim has here and today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So I hope all of you will join also for the next following 2 days. Thanks a lot. Again, thanks very much for being here, and we are very much happy and looking forward to listening to you. You have the floor. All is yours, please.
Thank you so much, Christian. Can everyone hear me? I'm honored to be back here after 20 years at this great university, of which you should be quite proud. It's one of the finest universities there is. I'm also honored once again to be with my friend Christian, who is one of the greatest scholars of international economic law in the world, in case you didn't realize it. I'm going to be speaking, as Christian said, today, tomorrow, and and Wednesday. Today, I will be speaking about where we are now and where it seems we might be going in the immediate future with the World Trade Organization. Tomorrow I'll be speaking about where, in my view, we should be going with the World Trade Organization. And Wednesday I'll be talking about the topic of my next, actually sixth, and forthcoming book, which will be published next May, which is the relationship between democracy and sustainable development, and how I believe we should change democracy to help achieve democratic global governance. I thought I would speak for a while and then we could have an exchange of views, as we used to describe it in Geneva. Questions, answers, and follow-ups. I'll try to be as helpful and responsive as I can in answering your questions. And I've found that I oftentimes learn as much from answering questions, if not more, than in giving the presentations. Here we are, just a few days after the latest U.S. presidential election, and it seems to me that we face two possibilities with respect to the position of my country, the United States of America, with respect to the World Trade Organization. The first policy, the first possibility is that things could continue more or less as they have been in terms of the American policy toward the WTO. In recent years, the United States has moved away from its commitment to trade multilateralism and increasingly engaged in unilateral trade actions of all kinds. And it has increasingly pushed the WTO to the periphery of U.S. trade thinking. The United States has also, as we'll discuss a little bit later, done a great deal to undermine the WTO dispute settlement system that 30 years ago the United States led the way in creating for the world. That's one possibility. Things could continue as they are. Another possibility is that the United States of America could withdraw from the WTO membership. This is possible under the WTO treaty. Any member of the WTO can withdraw with 6 months' notice. There's no vote, there's no permission slip. A sovereign country can simply withdraw if it chooses to do so while giving that notice. This has never happened before. Indeed, even at this late date, we have countries still lining up trying to join the WTO. But this is a possibility. Why should we care about any of this? Why should we care about what happens to the WTO? There's a very fine research institution called the Bertelsmann Institute here in Germany. A few years ago, it conducted a study to determine the extent to which all of the 166 member countries of the WTO have benefited from their WTO membership. The conclusion of the study was that every single member of the WTO had benefited economically by being a member of the WTO. Who had benefited the most? First was the United States of America. Second was China. Third was Germany. Many billions of dollars in profit and economic gains annually by virtue of being a member of the WTO for each of them and for all the other members of the WTO. This is not too surprising given that these are the leading trading countries in the world. But I think you'd find that here in Germany to some extent, certainly in the United States, based on recent evidence, there's no recognition that WTO membership has benefited the people at home. Ironically, it's China, I think, that fully understands the benefits of WTO membership to China. The Chinese know that without the benefit of WTO membership, their trade would be discriminated against every day in every part of the world to the extent that other countries could get away with it. So the Chinese find themselves as one of the most ardent champions of the success of the World Trade Organization. Why have we gained these benefits from membership in the WTO? Well, there we need to look a bit first at economics. We need to go back to Adam Smith, whom I know you've all read, and his views of the wealth of a country as being based on what it's able to achieve in terms of the benefits to the people of the country, as opposed to his opponents at the time that were Candleists, who thought that wealth was merely the accumulation of gold in some stack at home. Adam Smith preached the virtues of free trade. Equally important was the insight of one of the followers of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, half a century later, who explained the theory of comparative advantage, a counterintuitive theory that is not well understood in political circles in most parts of the world, but nevertheless underlies the rationale for the structure of the WTO. The theory of comparative advantage is that we all profit in terms of gains from trade when we specialize in what we can produce relatively better than our trading partners. It's very important to understand the need for the word relatively there. The country could theoretically produce every product better than any other country, but that country would still benefit from trade because there would be some things it could do relatively better than others, while allowing others to do those other things themselves, thus leading to overall economic gain for both. By the same token, if there's a country that produces nothing better than anyone else, still there's going to be a comparative advantage because it will be relatively better at doing some things than others and can profit from trade by specializing in those things it does relatively better than others. I dwell on this because there aren't many politicians in the world and in my country who understand the theory of comparative advantage, or at least they don't seem to do so based on their actions. But one of the underlying ideas for the multilateral trade system that is the WTO is that the producers of the world need to specialize in comparative advantages. The other underlying assumption is that we're going to benefit the most when we do so multilaterally. There are dozens of us here today together. Let's assume we were all individual countries. Perhaps you and I, sir, decide that we're going to have free trade in water glasses and telephones, that I will eliminate my taxes, my tariffs, which are taxes imposed at the border, on imports of telephones from you, and you will in turn eliminate your taxes, your tariffs on imports of water glasses from me. Well, that will certainly lead to a greater volume of trade between the two of us. But in the multilateral system of the WTO, there is a structure that says, and a rule that requires, that if we, the two of us, provide these advantages each to the other, then we will immediately and unconditionally provide the same advantages in trade in those products to everyone else who is a member of the organization. Now, what does this do as a practical matter? It does two things. It lowers a lot more barriers to trade than if the focus were just on the two of us as trading countries, because it will lower the barriers, eliminate the tariffs on trade in those two products for all the countries. And of course, the gains that are acquired from trade are vastly enhanced. You and I would make some gains from our bilateral deal, but when that bilateral deal is extended to everyone, then the gains from trade are multiplied manyfold. So this is the virtue of multilateralism. And to secure this virtue, there are certain basic rules that are at the foundation of the trading system. Two of them are rules of non-discrimination. One I've already described, and that is what is called the most favored nation treatment rule. And that says that if any two countries lower barriers to trade, if I lower my barriers to trade with him and his country, then I have to do the same for the same product and the like products of all of you or other countries. And this, as we've seen, multiplies the gains from trade for all of us. The other is the rule of national treatment. This says that in trade in a particular product, say water glasses, I cannot discriminate in favor of my producers of water glasses over the producers of water glasses that would be shipped to my jurisdiction, to my marketplace from other countries. So you can't discriminate in favor of domestic over foreign producers of like products. The third basic rule is the rule of concessions. Now, any economist will tell you that agreeing to lower your barriers to trade is not really a concession to someone else. Economically, it's a smart decision for your own sake. But in trade negotiations for nearly a century, doing so has been considered a concession. What happens within the structure of the legal framework of the WTO is that once a concession is made, once I agree that I'm going to eliminate tariffs on imports of water glasses, for example, then I bind that concession by putting it on a list of all my concessions, which is called a schedule. And every country that's a member of the WTO has such a schedule. These are binding and enforceable parts of the WTO treaty. And once you put something on your schedule, then you're committed not to provide for anything other than what's on your schedule. You can't suddenly increase tariffs. You're allowed to renegotiate these things, but if you don't renegotiate them in a way that's provided in the treaty, then you're violating the treaty if you don't adhere to your concession. Now, at this point, there are 50,000 pages of rules and probably 100,000 and more pages of rulings about those rules that are part of WTO jurisprudence. I'm not going to recite any more of them, but in order to talk about what's happening in the WTO today, it's important to know these three basic rules: the rules of most favored nation treatment, national treatment, and concessions. It's also important to understand one of the innovations of the WTO when it was created in 1995 as a successor to the previous General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT. And that is binding dispute settlement. In 1995, when we established the WTO, for the first time, we made the decisions that were taken by ad hoc panels, tribunals in dispute settlement legally enforceable. They were no longer optional because they can no longer be blocked by a single country. Usually a country who had been ruled against and did not want to have to implement the adverse ruling. So this was a great innovation in that really alone among all international forms of dispute settlement, the WTO jurists had the power of enforcing their rulings through the actions of the WTO members. This is done by the last resort of economic sanctions. If you're a country and a member of the WTO and you lose a dispute in dispute settlement, you have a choice. You can choose to ignore that ruling if you wish. You're a sovereign country. Or you can choose to comply with it. But if you choose to ignore it, under the rules, there's a price to pay. And that price is the loss of previously granted concessions in other areas of trade. And in practice, that can add up to billions of dollars in trade annually. So that until recently, countries complied with almost all WTO rules, even when they lost. At the apex of this dispute settlement system was an innovation in the Uruguay round that established the WTO. This innovation was the appellate body, on which I had the privilege of serving and twice chairing. The appellate body is, if you look at the WTO treaty, the tribunal of final appeal in all disputes that come before the WTO. There's an automatic right of appeal to the appellate body on legal issues and rulings in WTO panel reports. So the appellate body built up a great amount of jurisprudence as well. And under the WTO treaty, the only way that a WTO panel ruling is amended by an appellate body ruling would not be enforced is if every single member of the WTO agreed that it would not be. Practically speaking, this means that the party that won the dispute, that prevailed in the dispute, would have to agree to set aside its winning verdict. For some reason, this has never happened, and I don't doubt that it will. So the WTO treaty provides for the opposite of what had preceded it under the GATT system. Again, under the GATT, any single country could block the adoption of a report to make it legally binding. Under the WTO, every single country has to agree to not adopt it before, to keep it from becoming binding, just the opposite. So this is what we created in 1995. And we did so after a period of more than half a century in which, during round after round of multilateral trade negotiations, barriers to trade had been reduced worldwide. And as a result, the gains from trade for all the members of the trading system have been multiplied many-fold. The hope and expectation was that this would continue to happen under the WTO. Unfortunately, the Uruguay round that established the WTO was the last successful major negotiating round. The round called the Doha Development Round, which began in 2001, lasted for 15 years and ended in failure. There have been some successes along the way. This agreement on information technology that's been quite successful. There's a protocol to the services agreement on financial services that's been reasonably successful. One on telecommunications services. Also, we had a customs facilitation agreement. More recently, we've had a fisheries subsidies agreement, the beginning of what could be a very fine agreement, and notably the first sustainability agreement concluded by the WTO. But this is a short list compared to the long list of failures of the WTO over the past 30 years. We're a long list of issues in which we've tried and failed. We have not been able to eliminate the duties on environmental goods, even though we spent 20 years trying to do so. We've not been able to conclude any basic rules on digital trade, even though we've now spent the better part of a decade in trying to do so. The leading agenda items on the Doha Development Round are still agenda items. Further freeing of trade in agriculture, further freeing of trade in manufacturing, an expansion of the coverage of the services rules and concessions, and on and on and on. Nor have we even begun to do a lot of the work that needs to be done on the so-called trade and issues. Trade in the environment, for example. Trade and competition, for another. I'll discuss more of these tomorrow. And in this atmosphere of continued frustration and failure, countries have begun to go elsewhere. We've had a proliferation of hundreds of free trade agreements. Now, I've never met a free trade agreement that I wouldn't have voted for had I still been in the Congress of the United States, but any free trade agreement between a few countries is by definition an agreement that discriminates against the trade of all the other countries. So an FTA is necessarily an exception to the general most favored nation obligation in Article 1 of the GATT. The development of all of these FTAs has been likened by my friend Jagdish Bhagwati, the great international economist from Columbia University, as a spaghetti bowl. And it's quite difficult, even for skilled trade lawyers that many of you will soon be, to sort out the different strands of spaghetti in the bowl to understand exactly what the right rules are. What we've seen too, and it's been rapidly accelerating, is a return to protectionism. Now, what is protectionism? Here we go back to our friends Smith and Ricardo, the great advocates of free trade, who argued that countries were going to be better off if they lowered barriers to trade and specialized in those products, those goods and services in which they had relatively a comparative advantage because they produced them relatively better than others. Since that time, and still there is a competing view, the view of protectionists. One of the early luminaries among the protectionists was Friedrich List from Germany. And this argument is that Smith and Ricardo were wrong. What's best for a country is to build barriers to trade, to protect its own domestic producers against the competition from products from overseas. This is what is called protectionism, sometimes called mercantilism. And it is once again in the ascendancy in much of the world, including in my own country. In my own country, both parties now are protectionist. The issue in our recent presidential campaign was not whether we should embrace free trade or protectionism. The issue on trade was whether we would be more protectionist or less. And the United States is not the only country in which this is occurring. Now, there are many reasons for this. One of them is that trade with other countries is often blamed for the dislocations that occur in domestic economies, especially in my country where we have a less generous social safety net than exists in most of the European Union, for example. The truth of the matter is that the vast majority of the lost jobs and displaced employment that has occurred parallel with increasing trade has not been because of trade. It's been because of the embrace of new technologies. It's been because of automation. But as I frequently say, it's easier to blame a foreigner than a robot when you lose your job. And that's what's been occurring in the United States and is occurring in many other parts of the world as well, giving evidence to a renewed rise of protectionism. Technology, of course, is not through changing how we work and live. With the arrival of AI, we're now seeing studies predicting that services jobs everywhere in the world are now going to be threatened and changed by artificial intelligence. This is nothing we even discussed in our presidential election in the United States, yet 75% of our economy is services. And if if we can believe these studies, these changes in the services industries with attendant effects on employment are going to be happening very soon. And no one in a position of leadership in the United States has done much of anything to prepare the American people for this, much less figure out a way for them to get through it and still have a good life. One of the aspects of this return to protectionism is the desire to have great latitude in applying what are called trade remedies. Trade remedies are safeguards against surges of imports. They are countervailing duties to offset governmental subsidies that are provided to imports. They are anti-dumping duties that are applied to counter what is called dumping, which is when products are sold in the target market for less than it costs to produce them in the home market. Economists say, so what? You get cheaper products, but the GATT literally condemns, that's the word that's used, condemns dumping, and there's an entire agreement that permits anti-dumping duties so long as they're applied consistently with the rules in that agreement. Politically, what happened in the United States is that there was increasing pressure beginning with the turn of the century to apply more and more trade remedies. This was partly because of the increasing competition with China, but it was really much more than that. And this pressure was driven by industries that are located in just a handful of states in the United States, states such as Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which in addition to having a lot of smokestack industries that find it hard to compete in this new economic world, are also political swing states in congressional and presidential elections. So both of our political parties have been desirous of being able to apply trade remedies as much as they wish to secure the political support they require in those states, irrespective of whether this violates WTO rules or not. And when the appellate body in the WTO insisted that the United States comply with these rules in applying these remedies, the United States began to develop a campaign in opposition to the appellate body. This campaign was enacted through a series of refusals to join in appointing new members to the appellate body when sitting members finished their terms. Until just a couple of years ago, the appellate body no longer had any judges, so now it exists only on paper. What does this mean in terms of the dispute settlement system? It means we're back in the days of the GATT. Because recall that there is a right to appeal in the treaty. WTO panels are still working. My friend and I have a dispute over trade in water glasses. We go to the dispute settlement system. The panel makes a ruling. It rules in favor of him and against me. But I have a right to an appeal. So I file what's called a notice of appeal to the appellate body. There's no one on the appellate body to hear the appeal. So the appeal goes into a legal limbo. At this point, I think there are dozens of cases that are in this legal limbo. And as a consequence, the members of the WTO are not able to adopt a panel report. They're not able to adopt a panel report because I haven't been given the benefit of my right to an appeal. Thus, the bottom line is the same as it was under the GATT. One country, when they lose before a panel, can in effect block the enforcement of a ruling against it. Not only have we been doing that for several years, but increasingly countries, and especially my own, I have to say, have simply been taking unilateral trade actions in violation of the rules, in complete disregard of the rules. There are half a dozen cases on that list I mentioned of the caseload that's pending in the legal abyss that are cases in which other countries challenged the steel and aluminum tariffs imposed in recent years by the United States. The United States lost all those cases, and having succeeded in depopulating the appellate body, they filed appeals to the non-existent appellate body, or they simply ignored the rulings. If you read the US media now, it is full of speculation on how many more tariffs will be applied, which products they'll be applied, which countries will suffer from these tariffs in their trade. Speculation this morning that the United Kingdom will be excused from the tariffs, but the European Union will not. Speculation that Canada will be excused from tariffs on energy, and maybe from the 100% tariffs that are now being contemplated on Mexican imports into the United States, and on and on and on. All of these tariffs are in violation of the WTO treaty obligations of the United States of America. Yet I have yet to read even one statement and even one media account of this issue that even mentions the WTO. That's how far on the periphery the WTO has been pushed by the scofflaw actions of the United States of America. And of course, now that the United States is doing this, seemingly with impunity, what's happening elsewhere? Other countries are being tempted to do the same. Why should we comply with the rules if the Americans won't? So we see a danger of a continued fragmentation of the system, of a continued practice of simply ignoring the rules, of continued reliance on blocks of trade that could pose barriers to trade instead of freeing trade. And we wonder where we are. The WTO as an institution is still working. It's still the case that almost all the trade in the world is conducted almost every day in almost every way in compliance with WTO rules. And that has the benefit of smoothing trade, easing trade, and increasing the overall volume of trade. But we're approaching a point when I may soon not be able to say that any longer. The WTO is also doing a lot of other good work in terms of reviewing trade policies. Dispute settlement still occurs, and in a variety of ways, even in the absence of the appellate bodies, countries are often getting resolution of their disputes. Two countries that are in dispute can agree beforehand, before it's submitted to the panel, that they will be bound by the panel ruling, no matter the result, that they will relinquish their right to an appeal. That's one way of doing it. Also, there's an alternative arbitral system that's been established within the rules that had previously not been used before, that in essence establishes an alternative appellate body. This is the MPIA approach, if you need the acronym. And this is shown to be working, but it only applies to those countries that have signed on to participate in this system. And only about a third of the WTO membership is participating at this point. The United States has not joined this system, and therefore, if a country has a dispute with the United States, they cannot use this alternative form of dispute settlement. The United States, even before the election, has been in an unusual position in the WTO when compared with its long record of being a leader in the system. The United States has still participated in the WTO. It's not really been a leader. It has not tried to advance the agenda very much. It's not tried to do a whole lot to move things forward. It's not wanting to spend any domestic political capital on the International Trade Institution. As I said, we're left to wonder what will happen next. And I certainly don't know. But I do know this: if the WTO does not succeed, if it unravels because of U.S. action or inaction, or for any other reason, if it becomes the League of Nations, and I become one of the founders of the League of Nations in Trade, then that will not be the end of it. At some point, we will find ourselves reestablishing the WTO. Because if we're going to conduct trade in a peaceful world in a way that produces the most prosperity, then we need non-discriminatory rules. We need to act in a multilateral way, and we need to have an institution that can oversee this system and resolve disputes peacefully. Why don't I stop there? We'll take questions. I'll give you the best answers I can. I really appreciate all of you being here. And since many of you are, in fact, law students, I might deign to mention a specific article or two, or maybe even, if we're lucky, a footnote. Let me take questions one at a time, because that's the easiest way for me to remember what the question is. And I'll try to get to everybody. We're due to finish at 4, but I'm happy to stay longer if there are more questions. Who would have a question first? Now, don't be shy. You know.
Maybe I can start with breaking the ice for everybody then, but afterwards the students, please. I was just wondering, you didn't say much about the organization itself, the institutional structure of the World Trade Organization. There are many people who say it's not maybe so much the members being increasingly protectionistic, as you explained, but it's also the organization itself that is the problem. We all know Pascal Lamy, the material structure of the organization. What would you say, also from your inside perspective?
Well, first of all, as I think all of you know, and I didn't point out, and it's certainly worth pointing out, the World Trade Organization is the members. It's often said that it's a member-driven organization, and it is. In this way, it's somewhat different from the other Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. There is nothing called the WTO that can take any independent action. The WTO is only the members themselves acting together as something they choose to call the World Trade Organization. Now, in every country in the world, it's commonplace to pretend that the WTO has made us do this. But truth be told, every single member of the WTO has agreed to all the rules. And when they find themselves being reminded in dispute settlement to comply with the rules, they're only being asked to keep the promises they have voluntarily made as a part of the system. And even then, as I mentioned earlier, they can choose not to comply. It's just that it's a contractual arrangement, and if you choose not to comply with your obligations under the contract, then you stand to lose some of the benefits of the contract. So this is important to understand. But of course, there are individuals who are within the organization who serve in different positions. There is a secretariat that serves the members and provides for the operations of the organization. But they serve entirely at the pleasure of the members. The budget is provided by the membership on an annual basis. The amount is divvied up among countries based on their percentage of world trade in the previous year. So, United States, China, Germany, a few others, have a pretty good say on the budget committee, but they're not the only ones. There is a director general. In my view, we have a very fine director general now, Dr. Ngozi, who is from Nigeria, but also has U.S. citizenship. She's up for reappointment now to a second term. She is unopposed, but it's unclear whether she will have the support of the United States for a second term. That's one of the uncertainties we have now. I think she's done an extraordinary job in some extraordinarily bad circumstances. She's done her best to try to point the way forward for the WTO. So I'm one of her biggest fans. But it's unclear whether she will remain, and if she does not, it's completely unclear who would replace her. What the WTO is an institution that's committed to the international rule of law and trade. But the opposite approach is the rule of power. Those of us who believe in the enterprise of international law have committed our lives to trying to support the rule of law instead of the rule of power. But in trade, as in so much else, there's still those who have power who don't realize that their best and truest interest, both in the near and the long term, is in relinquishing the rule of power and upholding the rule of law. This is a debate we're having in my country now, in many respects, but trade is one of them. In trade, we seem to have forgotten why we helped create the WTO and the binding dispute settlement system that's a part of the structure of it. I was in the Congress at the time and was one of the half-dozen original co-sponsors of the implementing legislation for the Uruguay round trade agreements in the House of Representatives. So I was engaged in that debate. And I was debating at that time with some people on the other side who are now returning to power in the United States. And their views have, at least for now, prevailed. We'll see what happens after they officially return to power. As I said at the outset, there are two possibilities, it seems to me, realistically, at this time. One is that the position of the United States continues more or less as it has been with respect to the WTO during the previous two administrations, one from each party. The other is that there will be an abandonment of the WTO altogether by the United States, legally as well as an increasing matter of policy. We would withdraw from the membership. I don't think it's understood in the American populace what the consequences would be of withdrawing that membership. First of all, every other country in the world would be free legally to discriminate against American exports in any way it wished. Because of WTO rules, they cannot do that now. Second, all those concessions that have been made on lower tariffs that are part of WTO schedules, well, none of that would any longer apply to trade with the United States. So higher and higher and higher tariffs could be applied to U.S. exports, and so on. And because both of our political parties generally agree at this point on the supposed virtues of protection, this hasn't been mentioned in our political debate. So there would be a great deal of surprise, and not a happy surprise, in the American economy, for American businesses and workers, if we withdrew from the WTO, because none of this would be anticipated. Next question. Yes, sir.
Okay, I thought they would start with the students. First, thank you very much for your presentation. It was really, really
Thank
interesting.
you. Could you speak a little louder, please?
Yeah, I'm trying to, sorry. So at the end of your presentation, you mentioned your view that in case the current World Trade Organization fails, there will be kind of a second version of it, or a new one. And I would like you to maybe explain how you come to that conclusion, because it seems to me, and I really, really hope you're right, but it seems to me...
Well, I actually hope that the current WTO persists.
That would be a perfect solution, yes. But, well, I'm a bit skeptical, to be honest, because it seems to get even more complicated nowadays to come to compromises, especially internationally between countries, and also making the argument to your own people that this makes sense. So we have this kind of conversations and debates in Germany as well, what kind of money we should spend on other countries, and well, it makes sense from a trade perspective, but to a normal person, it doesn't make sense to spend money in Peru, for example.
We can talk about this issue, and should, if you're here tomorrow, ask me the question again in terms of why developed countries should provide money to poorer countries to assist them with mitigating and adapting to climate change. What's in it for us? You know, I've been about this a long time. I have had the privilege over the course of a number of decades of serving in administrative, legislative, and judicial positions of responsibility at every level of governance globally. Been the chief judge for the World Trade Court. I've been on the Transit Authority in Orlando, Florida, and a few places in between, such as the Congress. And in my experience, you don't win votes, you don't win support by encouraging people to be altruistic. As a moral matter, of course, we should be altruistic, shouldn't we? But it seems to me that a better way to get support is by encouraging people to take the best view of their own self-interest. There was a French theorist named Alexis de Tocqueville who came to the United States in the 1830s and wrote a famous book of political theory called Democracy in America. I don't know whether it's read here in Germany. But one of the things he said in the book as being crucial to what he saw as the success and the likelihood of increasing success of the new democratic republic in the United States was what he described as the American practice of, quote, the principle of self-interest rightly understood. What he meant by that was that in looking at their own self-interest, Americans didn't just look narrowly, they looked broadly. And they didn't just look immediately, they looked also to the long term. And this is his principle of interest rightly understood. So when I've tried to encourage people to vote for me or other members of Congress to support and vote for something, or in any other instance when I've been engaged in the act of trying to convince people to do something for the common good, I've always tried to approach it in terms of self-interest. Not by preaching to them, not by lecturing to them, not by talking down to them. It's been entirely too much of that. But by having a conversation, an exchange of views with them, in which I suggested that they might want to look widely and over the long term to what might be in their self-interest. Maybe it makes sense to you today to chop down all the trees on the hillside for whatever you can get in terms of immediate timber, but is it really in your long-term interest or in the broader interests that you have to live on a denuded hillside? Because if the trees are taken away, then when the winter comes and the rain comes in the spring, it will flood down onto you in the valley. There are a million more examples I could suggest, but I think that it's incumbent upon those who would lead us to try to communicate with us in a way that will help us conclude that we must perceive and follow our self-interest rightly understood. And this means looking more broadly than just right here. It means looking over time, something more than just right now. Does that help you?
I think I have to think about it. I mean, I'm here tomorrow, I guess, so I'll ask you again if there's any questions.
Well, I'll be saying my most radical things on Wednesday.
I'll be there on Wednesday too.
But I won't be talking about trade. But no, you're right to be skeptical. Christine?
I've got a follow-up to his question. So you talked about how both parties in the U.S. have taken this protectionist move, whereas, if I understand from your view and my personal view as well, that there's actually a huge amount of economic benefit to be had in dedicating to world trade and globalized trade. In your view, what is it that at least the Democratic Party lost in terms of the plot of this being a good thing? Is it just that the dominant position in swing states is that we're scared and...
There was a mistake made in the 1990s. And it was while I was in the Congress and just afterwards, and then continued after that. It was not a mistake to advance further into an open society by lowering more barriers to trade with other countries in the world. That was not a mistake. And indeed, the economic gains to the United States from doing this were enormous, and so were the economic gains of other people in the world as well. This mistake was that we did nothing domestically to try to help those people who inevitably were hurt by this additional trade. And we did virtually nothing domestically to make certain that these vast economic gains from trade were shared by the broad base of all the American people. This, I think, was the genesis of much of the economic opposition now to trade and to further globalization. The answer, however, is not to impose trade barriers, because imposing trade barriers simply denies us the gains from trade. You cannot be competitive if you don't compete. If you don't face competition, then you're not going to engage in as much innovation. And it's going to cost you more to do whatever you do, because you're denied those lower prices that come from these gains from trade. The answer is to provide much more of a safety net, much more of transitional assistance, to provide much more domestically so that the American people can be fully prepared to compete in a more open world economy. And that's what we haven't done. We need significant reforms of our education system. We need additional social safety. We need transitional assistance, not just for individuals, but for entire communities. And we need that kind of assistance not only when jobs are supposedly lost because of trade, but when they're lost for any reason. Recall me pointing out that the vast majority of these changes in the workforce have not been caused by trade, they've been caused by the embrace of automation. Since we haven't done those things, we have people who've plunged into depths of despair. And we've had all kinds of social ills, most famously the OxyContin drug epidemic that we've had. So it's no wonder that people are frustrated with elites. Now, I was saying this 30 years ago when I was in the Congress that we needed to do these things, and I've been saying it ever since, but I'm no longer in a position of political authority of any kind. And there are others who have done so as well, but mostly this type of connection has been ignored. And what we've seen is that, whereas in my time, members of the Republican Party were almost entirely in favor of free trade, now they're almost entirely on the other side. And whereas in my time we had still the narrow majority of Democrats in the House in favor of free trade, now there are virtually no Democrats in the House or the Senate who are in favor of free trade. One of the ironies is that if you take a poll, you'll find that a good solid majority of the American people do believe that trade benefits the country. But that's not a motivating issue for people who don't feel that they've been harmed by trade. Generally speaking, when you benefited from trade, you think it's by virtue of your own virtue. But when you've lost your job, and you can point to trade, you will, because trade comes from somewhere else. And the first recourse of everyone everywhere is always to blame the foreigner. I haven't taken many questions from this end. There's a question right here. You can be competing to see who will go next. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. You mentioned that there are still countries that want to become members of the WTO and are in the process of negotiating their membership. And I was just wondering how the crisis the WTO faces has affected these negotiations with the new countries and those.
Not at all.
The viewpoints. Not at all.
Not at all. They're still in line. They're still negotiating on a bilateral basis. The process is called accession. And whenever a country that is not a member of the system wants to become part of the system, it has to negotiate with those who are already in the system on the terms of its accession, of its acceding to membership. Will it have to comply with all the rules all at once, or can it apply with some of the rules all at once and then others over a period of time? That's usually what these negotiations are about. Generally, when countries have become members of the WTO, they have done a lot to change how they govern their domestic economies. And generally, too, this has been a matter of opening up their economies, making them more transparent, making them more accepting of foreign goods and services, and sometimes even just this undergoing of this process has led to economic gains. Yes, sir.
As you touched on, one of the central issues is that we have appeals into the void and there is no appellate body at the moment. You also have explained that there are now ways for some countries to get around it. Some have basically established other means to deal with it. However, I wonder, what about the original appellate body? Do you see a way forward for it, or do you believe it is gone for good until maybe 20, 30 years? Because as you rightly pointed out, at the moment there doesn't seem to be any interest, at least in US politics, to actually fix these issues.
I don't see any restoration of the appellate body in its previous form in the foreseeable future. Furthermore, I worry that if other countries accommodate the United States in some of the wrong ways in order to secure the return of an appellate body, it will not really resemble the appellate body we had before. What's most important in terms of any judicial tribunal of any kind is that it be both independent and impartial. This is the key. And if the tribunal answers to politicians, then it's not independent, it's not impartial, and it's not going to render fairness and justice, whether it's economic justice or any other kind. This is not a new insight. In my country, you can find this insight in the Federalist Papers that were written by some of our leading founders when our Constitution was first put in place. And you can see it also in thinking among leading German legal theorists and British legal theorists, you know, people from all over the world, Jürgen Habermas, for example. But I fear that if the appellate body were to come back now, he would do so in a way that would make it, in which it would be less independent, and therefore not impartial. Part of what the United States, and here I have to say it's both parties, have been seeking has been essentially for the parties to a dispute to be able to edit the rulings of the judges before they're finalized. And this changes the legal ruling into a political accommodation. And I fear that in their understandable desire to restore some type of second level of legal decision-making in the dispute settlement system, the other members of the WTO may agree to this. And I think this would be worse than having no appellate body at all. Very good question. Who's next? Anna.
Kind of leading on Jan's question, you in the end said even if the WTO fails, we construct a new one, like the WTO will find its way back. But without any like positive actions from the states, you really think that the WTO will become a really enforceable, strong, and also like internationally like respected and important institution? Really?
Well, first of all, on my own country, I know there's a lot of disappointment in the wider world about the outcome of our recent election. And I can understand that. But this was a democratic election. America is still a democracy. And I certainly hope we'll have future elections. And future elections could lead to different results. We'll have another election in 2 years and another presidential election in 4 years. And I think we have to wait until the new administration actually takes power and begins doing things before we judge what they've done and not done. Because at this point still it's just talk. So let's not assume that the world has ended. And in terms of the WTO, I would say it's probably more likely that the U.S. policy will continue pretty much as it is now than that the U.S. will withdraw from the WTO. That's a guess, but it's an educated guess. And that will leave in place the possibility for a change in U.S. policy later. It's also true that, and I know this shocks some Americans, the United States is not the only country in the world. I often remind my American audiences, 4% of the people in the world are Americans. This means that 96% are not. And while I think it's vital that the United States be engaged in trying to work through global cooperation to address a lot of concerns that can only be addressed globally, and indeed I think a lot of these concerns cannot be addressed at this time unless the United States and China are working together rather than at odds. Nevertheless, there's a lot that the rest of the world can do, even if the United States seems to be moving in a different direction. On trade, the European Union has shown great leadership in recent years. On much else it has as well. And of course, Germany's been a leader within the EU, which I applaud. I am by nature an optimist. I believe we have a duty of optimism. I could be doing other things instead of spending all of my time writing about what we perhaps should do and traveling the world and speaking about what I think we should be doing. But I believe that I not only have a duty of optimism, I have a duty to serve in some way, to contribute for as long as I'm here. And I'm not the only one that feels that way. My guess is many of you have already reached that same conclusion about your lives, and there are many, many people laboring in the vineyard. My former colleague and fellow judge on the appellate body, the great judge Florentino Feliciano from the Philippines, once told me, James, he always called me James, always remember there are others working in the vineyard. And so, I'm not alone in advocating these things. I'm confident many of you would work alongside me. And I don't have any intention of giving up. Skepticism, I think, is rightly warranted, but so is optimism. Look at what Germany has done in 3/4 of a century. Germany is now recognized worldwide as one of the great leaders in working for world peace. We Americans have a lot to lose in terms of our reputation if we take the wrong road. I'm confident we'll find our way back to the right road. Who's next? Sir.
Thank you. First of all, you touched upon David Ricardo's principle or theory of comparative advantage and suggested that a lot of politicians might not understand what that means. Now, we had this discussion in Germany after the Russian invasion of Ukraine about decoupling. And my feeling was that that principle was understood, but seen in conflict with other legitimate policy interests. For example, decoupling or the danger of specialization that comes with comparative advantage in dependency on specific partners. How would you address that conflict? Do you see it as a conflict, or is there a resolution within the theory? Yeah, maybe you could comment on that.
Well, I think and, on economic terms, it continues to make a great deal of sense. I don't know that protectionists have ever refuted it. History says they're wrong. But this does not mean that trade is the only value in the world. Trade is a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. Trade is a means to the end of human freedom. But there are going to be occasions when there will be competing considerations. And even those of us who advocate free trade, such as I do, are not saying that we think that there should always be utterly free trade in every situation. If a product is poisonous, you can say, buyer beware, caveat emptor, and continue with free trade, or you can conclude, well, maybe we should put some restrictions on trade in poison. So there are going to be competing considerations, and they may relate, for example, to human rights in all its manifestations. They may relate to nature, of which, by the way, we're a part. We're just one species among many, and indeed dwindling few, unfortunately. So I think in any individual circumstance, one can't simply look at the issue as simply purely a trade issue. You need to look at other considerations as well. Is this helping you in terms of?
Yeah, it does. May I ask a follow-up?
Certainly.
You talked about other considerations such as nature, but are they, I think that's going to be the topic tomorrow as well, but...
That is my topic tomorrow, yes.
Okay, maybe I restrain myself for bearing and wait tomorrow.
Okay, well, I'll count on you to ask a question tomorrow. Who next? This group down here isn't asking many questions. Maybe I should ask you questions. Yes.
I have a question. You, at the very beginning of your presentation, talked about the chance that the US might drop out of the WTO. I have two questions.
It's a possibility.
Yeah, it's a possibility, exactly. First question, how, I mean, it's hard to quantify, but how likely do you think it is? And second question, what is the outfall from that? Does the US have many FTAs with other countries that it could rely on alternatively, especially with its most important trading partners? How has the practice of the US been in that regard within the last years? Have they prepared for a potential dropout through negotiating more FTAs like the USMCA?
This is a very good question, and the answer is no. They do not. As you've rightly pointed out, if the United States chose to withdraw from the WTO, it conceivably could protect, in the sense of ensuring its trade against discrimination by the terms of other free trade arrangements. But the United States doesn't have very many free trade agreements compared with Mexico or the EU or other countries. So this wouldn't afford the U.S. very much insurance against what would otherwise be an outpouring of discrimination against U.S. exports. To answer your question about whether I think this is likely to happen is no, I don't think it's likely to happen. But it could. We're going to have basically one decision maker. And my own view is that this would require congressional action, but it's not clear that the Congress will engage in independent thinking on this particular issue. Still, I think it's more likely we'll continue to see, to a difference in degree, but not in kind, the same type of attitude toward the WTO and WTO rules that we've been seeing in the current administration. Have we finished for the day?
I guess if there are no further questions, we also right on time.
We are right on time, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I love being right on time. So, thank you so much. I'll be here tomorrow afternoon to talk about what, in my view, the World Trade Organization should be doing. And then on Wednesday, I'll be talking about a topic other than trade, but one that I think is even more important, which is how we can achieve both global democracy and global sustainable development, which is the topic of my forthcoming next book. Thank you all so very much.
And we'll wait for you.